Audible. We thank Audible for supporting the Paranormal Podcast, and for a free audiobook with a 30-day free trial, go to audible.com/paranormal. That's audible.com/paranormal. Thanks, Audible. Also, the Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold, and so glad to be with you today. And wow, do we have a great show for you. And I got to say, polar opposites, the topics that we're going to cover today. We're going to start with haunted toys. I mean, that is a frightening concept, but that is what we're going to talk about, haunted toys in part one. And then in part two, we're going to have A Call from Heaven by Josie Varga. So, you know, whether you love the spooky stuff or you love the sweet stuff, we've got something for you today. I think you are going to enjoy the Paranormal Podcast this week. And if you do, please go and subscribe. I ask that every single person who has a smartphone, specifically iPhones, please subscribe. This week I'm just going to put this right to you. You have an iPhone. Right on your iPhone, there is an app called Podcasts. It's a purple square with a little figure, a white figure on it. I want you to click on that. I want you to go down to the little spyglass, magnifying glass. I want you to click on search. I want you to look for Paranormal Podcast. And when this show pops up, and it will, because we're number one for that term, I want you to click on it, and then I want you to hit the word subscribe. I'm going to be very specific. So please do that. If you have to replay this to hear it, please do, because that helps us immensely when it comes to ranking on Apple Podcasts. And I think about 80% of podcasts are listened to on an Apple device. So I want to talk specifically to you Apple folk out there. And maybe you just do it manual every week. Well, please take that extra step to go ahead and subscribe. While you're at it, if you rate it and review it, that's fantastic. But first and foremost, please subscribe, because when you do, you'll automatically hear shows like this. Well, we've got a treat for you today, because we're going to talk about, if you love creepy stuff, I can tell you that it's very difficult to get more creepy than this. And I'm talking about the subject of haunted toys. And we've got two great people to talk about that, because they have a recent book out that covers haunted toys. And what is it called? Haunted Toys. We have the co-authors with us of that book, David Weatherly and Ross Allison, and we're so glad to have both of them with us. Of course, if you've listened to the shows any time at all, you know the name David Weatherly. He's been on our shows and on our webinars. He is an investigator, author, and world explorer, and he's spent his life pursuing the world of the strange, investigating cases around the globe. For example, you know him from his books Strange Intruders and Black-Eyed Children. And I think that creepiness factor is almost met with haunted toys. And then Ross is a new friend. We've not gotten to speak with him before, but we're so glad to welcome him. He is the president and founder of A-Ghost, Advanced Ghost Hunters of Seattle, Tacoma, with close to 30 years of investigating the paranormal. And he is also an accomplished author. Gentlemen, welcome to the program today.
Thanks, Jim. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to be with you. So what inspired you to do a book on haunted toys?
No one's done it.
You know, yeah, I think that's a good reason.
Those were two big reasons. It's funny how one of those things comes about. I actually was just sitting in my office one day. I had known Ross on Facebook for some time, and I met him out in Seattle when I was out on a visit, and actually did a private tour with him of some of Seattle's spooky locations, at which he's probably the foremost expert. And, quite some time after that, it was probably a year later, I was sitting in my office and I was just thinking about different projects, and I shot Ross an email just out of the blue. And I said, hey, you have any interest in working on a project together? And that started a dialogue. We initially talked about doing something just on creepy dolls because there were so many of them. And that's something that, gets a real reaction out of people. But then when Ross started digging in some research, just, for an outline, he started finding all these other toys, and he said, why don't we just do haunted toys and put some of this other information in, and we just kind of rolled from there.
That's a great idea. I love it. And Ross, I mean, I've got to believe that it's, when you think about something like the paranormal, it seems like everything's been done in them for just some reason. Nobody ever thought to do this. That had to be pretty exciting.
It was, especially as we started uncovering a lot of these very unique encounters that people were having, not just, with dolls and toys, but also, with games as well, the creepy games that children would play. And I just, like David said, it just, the subject just kept getting bigger and bigger, and we realized we had a pretty awesome book here.
Well, one thing you cover straight away in the book is that there are different kinds of haunted objects. I guess I never stopped to think about it. You say there's 3 kinds. What are the 3 kinds of haunted objects?
Oh, well, we got basically an object that is embedded with the spirits of a child, or you've got an object that has developed its own personality. And then there's also objects that were used in some sort of ritual. Okay,
so objects cursed through some kind of spiritual ritual, objects possessed by a spirit, and objects that absorb energy from their previous owner or a child. That's really interesting. I never thought about it. And David, are there, how do I know if I have a haunted toy? Are there some signs?
Usually, it's funny because when Ross and I started talking about this project, of course, one of the things that we had each experienced having such a long career in the paranormal was that over the years we had so many people come up and tell us, little stories, little side stories sometimes about, my child had this toy that didn't have any batteries in it, but it kept going off, kept lighting up or running. And, also a lot of people have stories about a toy from their childhood. So, this is something that's been going on for decades, really, and that people have sort of had in the back of their minds very often, some kind of creepy toy or unsettling toy or a toy they were particularly fond of that seemed to have a life of its own in some way.
And go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's an interesting point you bring up about this going on for decades. That was going to be one of my questions, because I think we think, well, this is something that is relatively new and it impacts old toys, particularly dolls. But I guess this could even happen with modern toys. It could happen with toys of any era.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Of course, some of the ones that have had the most attention put on them are ones that have been in the spotlight in terms of other entertainment and so forth. Dolls, of course, are at the top of that list. Robert the doll, for instance, he's over 100 years old now. And Robert actually inspired the Chucky movies because there's so many creepy legends about Robert the doll. And then, of course, we have Annabelle, who's in the Warren Museum, who has also inspired movies at this point. But there are other toys. There are other toys that are much more modern that people are having, strange things occur with. And sometimes that's just a little stuffed animal. Sometimes it's something electronic. There are a few stories creeping in about electronic games and things like that. But it can virtually be any kind of toy. It just depends on the circumstances.
Now, are there particular, I'd like both of you to answer it, do you have a personal toy that creeps you out the most, maybe one that you've been personally exposed to, or one that, we know about Robert and some of the ones that most people know about, but are there any maybe we don't know about that creeped you guys out?
Ross?
Well, well, for me, my personal experience now is that I've started collecting my own haunted toys as well. At Spooked in Seattle, we actually have a death museum, and in that death museum, we have a section of haunted dolls. So I was really excited when we started working on this project that, one of my favorite dolls that I personally own he's known as Mr. Creepy. So I was able to put Mr. Creepy in the book because he had a great story to tell. Now, Mr. Creepy came to me when I would do my shopping at a lot of antique stores because I'm, out there collecting death memorabilia for my museum, but also, any odd objects that I might come across. So I was visiting this antique store, and of course, I asked her if she had anything that had to do with, death, but also, if there was anything odd in her store. And as soon as I said that, her, eyes just lit up, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I have to introduce you to Mr. Creepy." So this is the name that she'd given this doll. Now, Mr. Creepy is a ventriloquist doll. And he actually was made in the late 1960s by a retired ventriloquist artist. And in his retirement years, he was making these dolls. And he made a doll in his likeness, but he also made a female counterpart in his wife's likeness. Now, what makes these dolls extra creepy is the fact that they used their real hair on these dolls.
Yeah.
Now, she tells me, she tells me that she obtained Mr. Creepy and the female counterparts at an estate sale. And this is after the couple had unfortunately passed away in an accident. So she obtained both of these dolls, and she put them in her shop, and they sat in her shop for quite some time until she had to move. So she ends up packing up these dolls, and she packed them up separately. And she ended up putting them into storage until she moved to another shop. Well, when she went back to collect more antiques for her new shop, she only came across Mr. Creepy. She had misplaced the female counterpart. So she just brought him to her shop, and she put him in a glass case, behind the register. Well, as soon as she had brought him out, and she had this creepy feeling like there was always somebody, standing behind her and watching her. Now, she's never had any odd experiences with this doll before, but it just got to be really weird because every time she'd come back to the shop the next morning, she'd find that his head would be turned in a different direction.
Oh, boy.
His eyes would be looking in a different direction. And one day she even said that when she came into her shop, she found that the glass case had been opened. So it started to freak her out quite a bit. So she ended up moving Mr. Creepy to the back of the store, and she put him on a bottom shelf so that she wouldn't have to look at him every day. So, of course, when I walked in the store and asked about oddities, she takes me right to him. And so I decided, I'll take him. So I brought him to Spooked in Seattle, and I put him in this big glass case that we had at the time. And in this big glass case, it was really heavy. You had to pull it away from the wall, and that was the only way to get to the doors, this glass case. You unlock the doors, put the doll in, and push it back up against the wall. Well, shortly after I had put him in this glass case, one day I was alone at Spooked in Seattle, and I'm actually hearing what sounds like this thud against glass. So I immediately think there's something happened in the gift shop. So I go out and I'm looking in the gift shop. I can't find anything disturbed. And I start making my way around through the rest of the museum, and I'm now coming around the tables, and I'm facing the glass case with all the dolls in it. And I noticed right away that his head is now turned and leaning up against the glass. So I take a picture of this, just to prove to people, this really did happen. So a little bit later, as I'm, reviewing my photos, I noticed that in one of the pictures, I zoom in, and his face, as it's leaning up against the glass, I can see the reflection. Now, where this doll has big round eyes, in the reflection, the eyes were very droopy, and he looked more lifelike. And I'm thinking, gosh, I may have captured the reflection of the man that haunts this doll.
Wow.
So I think he's just, looking around for his female counterparts that we've now dubbed Mrs. Creepy. So
wow.
I think it's definitely an interesting story, and I am actually hoping that someday we will find her and bring those two back together.
Now, David, that's a tall task. Do you have one that you feel particularly strongly about?
I'm always asked what really creeps me out or scares me and things like that. But really, due to the nature of, what I've done for over 40 years now, a lot of this kind of stuff doesn't really, doesn't disturb me or creep me out or anything like that. I did have an experience that was rather surreal and certainly had a creepy vibe that connects to toys, and that was my visit to the Island of the Dolls.
Oh, yes.
For those that don't know what this is a small island off the back canals of Mexico City. And the legend is that there was a gentleman who had visited this island, and he believed, the short version of the story is that he believed that there was the spirit of a little girl dwelling on this island who had drowned in the water right at the island's edge. And he felt her spirit was unsettled, and in order to try to, bring her some peace, he brought her an offering of some candles and some candies and a doll. Now, this gentleman became, for some reason, very obsessed with appeasing this spirit. He actually sort of abandoned his family and started to dedicate all of his time and energy to the island. He stayed on the island all the time. He would go into the cities, and he would do anything he could to get dolls. He would barter, he would buy, he would do whatever he could, and it didn't matter what the condition of the dolls was. Whether they were new or old. It even got to the point where even pieces of dolls, he would bring. And over the years, he constantly carried these dolls and pieces of dolls back to the island, and he put them everywhere, so that the entire island really is covered with these things. Now, it wasn't just him, because in later years, when people started to hear about this, they went to visit because they wanted to see this, this curiosity. And they would bring dolls as an offering, and they still do to this day. So that after all the years of these dolls and pieces of dolls being brought to the island, nature, of course, continues to run its course. And when you visit this place, it's a very surreal experience, because, first of all, it's difficult to find someone who will take you to the actual Island of the Dolls, because it's considered not necessarily taboo, but there's a lot of the fellows who run these boats who just don't want to run the risk of interfering with any spirits, so they don't want to land their boat on these islands. When I went, it was many years ago, and the fellow, he took me close enough that I could jump out of the boat in about knee-deep water and wade the rest of the way to the island, and hope that he was actually going to come back, as he agreed to do, to get me later on. But what has happened is that there's so much strange energy on this island. When you walk through it, vines and tree limbs and all these things have intermingled with the dolls and the pieces of dolls, so that you might be walking and see just a pair of eyes peering out at you from a gnarled root of a tree that has grown over the piece of doll that was left there. There are dolls that hang all over this island, and there's a small shack on the island that is covered with dolls inside and out. There's so much strange paranormal activity that takes place on this island that you hear these strange rapping noises. You hear voices and whispers. You hear the laughter of children. Now, the gentleman who was so obsessed with the spirit of this little girl who drowned in the water was later found face down in the water. He himself had drowned at the island's edge. So the legend is that he also now inhabits the island of the dolls.
Ugh. That is, and I've seen pictures of that, and that is pretty terrifying. It just looks creepy. I couldn't even imagine being on the island, let alone looking at the pictures. But we are here to talk creepy stuff, nothing creepier than haunted toys. David Weatherly and Ross Allison are our guests on the Paranormal Podcast, and we'll be back right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Audible, and we love Audible and have for years because they have an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original shows, news, comedy, and more. And audiobooks are great because you can listen to them while you're doing something else. You could be driving, stuck in traffic, on the subway or the bus, doing chores around the house, maybe cutting the grass. I hate that, but I love it with Audible. At the gym, doing errands, whatever, and you can enjoy great audio entertainment with Audible. And for our audience, you can try it for free. Audible is offering a free audiobook with a 30-day free trial. If you want to listen to it, Audible has it. Just go to audible.com/paranormal. That's audible.com/paranormal and browse their unmatched selection of audio content. And download a title for free and start listening. It's that easy. Now, I've been listening to something that's just come out recently, and it is awesome. Now, I know there's a lot of big TV shows now with Sherlock Holmes, but there is the original. And I love what Audible has done here. They've taken Stephen Fry, who's a British kind of bon vivant, kind of raconteur, comedian, really a British national treasure, and he has created the definitive collection of Sherlock Holmes books. 62 hours and 54 minutes. Get that. And I've just recently started listening to it, and I'm loving it. And you could get it for free. 62 hours and 54 minutes. Now, by the way, if you weren't a member and you went to buy this, it would be over $82. And you can get it for free. All you have to do is go over to my special URL, the URL for us, and that is audible.com/paranormal. That's audible.com/paranormal. And pick up on that title or maybe something else. That's a free audiobook with a 30-day free trial at audible.com/paranormal. I think you're going to love it. Now, there's some other great things that Audible brings you. It's called, they have the Great Listen Guarantee. If you choose a book and you decide you don't like it, no worries. You can exchange it for another title at any time. No questions asked. And I love their mobile app. It's so easy to use. Now, it is important when you sign up to get your free book. So we get credit and you get your free title that you go to audible.com/paranormal. But once you do that and sign up, you can use their mobile app, and it is fantastic. But audible.com/paranormal with your PC or Mac when you first sign up. And those free apps you can download and listen on your mobile device. Everything syncs up to your account. It's fantastic. I love what Audible has been and what they're becoming, because they're adding things like their Audible channels service, which is awesome. I love Audible. I have for a long time. I continue to be a paying user. I will continue being a paying user. They are fantastic. Just go to audible.com/paranormal. That's audible.com/paranormal. Check it out. You'll love it. You'll enjoy it. Thanks, Audible. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guests are David Weatherly and Ross Allison. They are the authors of the recent book, Haunted Toys. Now, David and Ross, if someone suspects they may have a haunted toy in their presence, what are some of the telltale signs that a toy might be haunted?
Go ahead, Ross. Well, there are what we put in the book are 5 signs to know if you might be dealing with a haunted toy, and one of those is, of course, the bad vibes. When you are around this toy, gives you the creeps. And again, that could be just explained because might be a creepy looking toy. But also, you basically could be dealing with something that has suspicious origins. You're not sure of where it came from. It may have been handmade. But then reanimation is also a very one thing that you also might encounter too, where the doll is being moved around. You put it on the shelf and you come back and the doll is not there. And then, of course, maybe some interesting sounds that you might experience. I know one doll that I have in my museum, it has the old air box in it. And if you're not familiar with that, that means that you have to tilt the doll to get it to say mama. And you tilt it back and it'll say mama again. People have experienced where these dolls, when they're not being moved, will actually call out mama or make, certain noises that they would make. Yeah. And then, of course, the biggest fear is when they try to do harm. Situations where, as we put it, they become a tripping hazard. They're constantly under your feet. So those are some of the common things that you may experience with a haunted toy.
Now, one of the things that freaks me out is this idea that toys that are supposed to require batteries, batteries may not be included, and in some case they may not be needed. That these toys spring to life without any visible method of energy. Talk to us about toys without batteries that still do strange things.
Well, toys, it's like anything else that on some occasions can be manipulated by some energy or force or perhaps spirit that we don't understand or of course see with our naked eye. So, there's a lot of cases where people will report that their child has developed a particular affinity for a toy, and that the toy seems to respond somehow to that child. Now, there's a lot of possibilities to explain what that, what's causing that. It could be that indeed some type of spirit has taken up residence in the object, be it a doll or some other toy, and is responding to stimulus around it. Or it could be simply that, it's part of the human dynamic that we don't quite understand at this point, in that it may be there's so much energy projected into that toy as a living thing by the child and others, that it could be creating an energy that responds somehow. It's just not quite in tulpa territory, but when you look at this concept of especially young children and children going through puberty, focusing a lot of energy and intent into an object, and it's somehow responding, that object could be becoming a storehouse of energy that is responding accordingly.
Interesting. Now, in terms of haunted toys, is there something that we can do to make sure our toys don't become haunted? Things we can stay away from, whether it's Ouija boards or whatever it is.
Well, very often it's antique toys are very often repositories for some type of energy, be it spiritual attachment or just some kind of residual energy that ends up. I know that a lot of people that have talked to me about such cases, very frequently it turns out to be that the toy is some kind of antique that was handed down by the family, or something that someone bought in a used toy store or an antique store and things like that. And of course I have, tons of stories from people who have memories of the creepy doll that their, grandmother had sitting on the little chair and things like that. And I'll let Ross cover, the other aspect of modern toys and how they might obtain energy.
Well, one thing, I do want to point out, too, when you think about these antique toys, they've been around much longer. They probably have been given a lot more attention, not just the child that owned the doll, but as it's been passed around quite a bit. You think of, situations like Robert the doll. Now he sits in a museum where, people every day, hundreds of people are giving him attention. So I think, getting into that situation where a lot of these, toys, especially the older they are, the more attention and energy that's been given to them. But, when it comes to, modern toys, there's lots of toys out there that have been interacting with the living in situations like we talked about, and with batteries not included. One of my favorite stories in that section was this little stuffed bear. Now, this bear was one of those smart toys where, if you push the left paw, it'll say, "Oh, that's my left hand."
Right.
And if you push the right paw, it'll say, "Oh, that's my right hand." Well, one night, the parents were awoken by this doll, the stuffed bear. It kept repeating that over and over again. And so the father, sneaks into his, son's room because he doesn't want to wake up his son, and he's afraid that this bear is going to wake up his son. So he goes in, and he grabs the bear, he opens it up, and he takes the batteries out, and he puts the bear back. Well, the next morning, as they're all sitting at the kitchen table having breakfast, the father hands his son the batteries and says, "Here, you can put these back in your bear." And his son just kind of looked at him confused, and he's like, "Why would you want me to put these back in the bear?" And he's like, "Your bear was going off that night."
Mm-hmm.
And he again, very confused by this, because he immediately tells his father, he says, "These batteries have been dead for a really long time." So it's just like, why was this bear going off?
Exactly. I love this topic. One last thing I want to cover before we close out, and recommend that everybody buy the book, because if you're into this stuff, you really need to check out this book. But you talked about games. Now, games aren't something other than the Ouija board, which, is marketed as a game. I wouldn't connect games to this kind of thing, although I have some ideas of why that might be. Talk to us about haunted games.
That's probably the creepiest chapter in the book. Some of the games that are out there, and I'll let Ross tell you about a couple of gems that he uncovered. But we do cover Ouija boards because it's technically it is a game, and it's still marketed that way. Much to the chagrin of many, religious believers. But, there's a few other things out there, too, that are really kind of odd. The Charlie craze that swept a couple of years ago was, technically a game. And when you look at the bare basics of this thing, it's a bit absurd. First of all, it's purportedly a game to summon a Mexican demon named Charlie, who will answer all of your questions. But what I found to be one of the creepiest aspects of the game was that you have to ask demons permission to stop playing the game. Well, this is kind of training teens and preteens, with whatever.
We're getting some break.
At least that's how the game is structured.
We were getting some break up there, so maybe Charlie's interfering a little bit. But you were basically saying it was training teens and preteens to can you finish that thought?
Yeah, well, basically to sort of fling open the doors and communicate with something that they believe is demonic. Now, whether they're actually summoning a spirit or whether, they're tapping into the energy of their higher consciousness, it's hard to say, but it's the parameters are terrible, when it comes down to it. There are much better ways to learn to use your psychic abilities rather than connecting them to, the power of a demon somehow. And the game, of course, it became a viral craze. A lot of people believe that the game was actually connected to a movie campaign But really the game existed prior to that. It's just that it sort of coincided that the game started going viral on the internet, and this movie company jumped in and took advantage of it and utilized all the attention that it was getting. And of course, the Catholic Church had to step in and say, this is terrible. You can't do this, and try to stop people from doing it, which, of course, just made it all the more popular.
Right.
So, that's just a couple of the modern things. And of course, there are other things like Bloody Mary and so forth that do the same. But you want to get into really creepy territory. Let Ross tell you about a couple of the things that he uncovered.
Yes, please do.
Well, I think I will start with one of my favorites, and that is hide and seek alone. The story is that you will actually take a doll, and you will gut this doll, and you will fill it with rice. Now, you take a red thread, and you sew this doll up. And as you're sewing this doll up, you'll wrap the thread around the doll, and you give the doll a name. And this is to help bind the spirit to this doll. Now, you take this doll and you put it in a bucket of water or even in the bathtub. And now you're going to take a knife, and you're going to tell the doll that you're it. All right? Not the doll, but that you with the knife are it. And you're going to go around through the house, and you're going to hide. But before you hide, you're going to turn off all the lights. And you're also going to turn on a radio onto a static station. Now, you're going to find a place to hide in. And as soon as you get to that place, you'll count to 10. All right? Now, you run back to the doll, and when you see the doll, you're supposed to stab the doll 3 times. All right? And as you're stabbing the doll, you're going to now say that you're it, you're it, you're it. And, of course, now you're going to leave the knife with the doll, and you're going to return to your hiding spot. Now, in your hiding spot, you're also supposed to have a glass of salt water, okay? And as you're waiting to see if the doll will find you, many people have claimed to hear the pitter-patter of feet going up and down the halls. Some have even claimed to hear the knife scraping up against the wall. Others have heard the giggling of a child. So if you believe that this doll is about to find you, then, of course, you're going to take that salt water and put it in your mouth, and now you're going to have to immediately go out there and see if you can find that doll looking around for you.
Ugh.
And, of course, they say that sometimes the doll is not where you left it. So now you have to find this doll. And when you find the doll, you're supposed to spit the salt water onto the doll. And this will actually bring that game to an end. So, yeah, that is definitely one of the creepiest games.
I mean, who would want to do that? Let's say that. Do not try this at home. First of all, but wow,
Oh, yeah.
who would even want to do that?
Well, apparently there are some kids out there that are morbid enough that would want to try it. And we do clearly state in all these games that, we put in the book, please don't do this. This is, you put yourself at risk when
Yes.
you don't know what you're dealing with.
Yes, yes. And I was wondering if, it even got to, board games and things, maybe because people handled the pieces a lot with their hands, and maybe there's, residual energy or anything like that. Did you ever find anything like that?
Outside of a Ouija board, I don't think so.
Yeah, that I always wonder about when people have objects that they handle up. For example, I have a pocket knife that belonged to my grandfather, and he died, over 40 years ago. Or no, almost 40 years ago. And I swear, when I touch that and I see that and I have that in my presence, I feel him. Now, it might be purely psychological, or there may be something to it. But there's definitely something to this idea of haunted toys. And today we've been talking to David Weatherly and Ross Allison about it. Gentlemen, where can people find the book? And also, please tell people where they can find out more information about all of your various personal projects.
Well, the book is available on Amazon.com, and it's in both paperback and Kindle format. I personally love the paperback edition because we did some really cool images throughout the book that are sort of artistic representations and photographs and so forth of, creepy toys in general. And as far as following my other work, which I've got tons of projects coming up, you can check out twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com. That's probably the best place to keep up with my work.
And Ross?
And you can definitely track me down through my organization, Ghost, which stands for the Advanced Ghost Hunters of Seattle, Tacoma, and that's ghost.org. Or you can follow me on Facebook, just Ross Allison Ghost Hunter.
That's great. Our guests have been David Weatherly and Ross Allison. Their book is Haunted Toys. Check it out. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Well, that was a lot of fun. I want to get all toys out of my house now. Thank you. That was a great segment, gentlemen. We appreciate it. And next up is Josie Vargas. She's going to talk to us about something far sweeter, a call from heaven. Many times on the shows, people ask me, what is your favorite topic? What fascinates you the most? And if you've heard this before, I apologize for repeating myself. But the topic that interests me most, more so than ghosts per se, typical ghost, or UFOs or Bigfoot or anything like that, although we cover all those things, are fascinated by all of them, is the afterlife. What happens to us when we die? Because, as I've said before, we may not all see a UFO. We may all not see a ghost. We may not see Bigfoot. But I hate to be the one to break it to you. We're all going to die. And that's why I'm very interested to hear more from our guest today, Josie Varga. She is the author of the new book, A Call from Heaven, Personal Accounts of Deathbed Visits, Angelic Visions, and Crossings to the Other Side. And she is also the best-selling author of several books, including Visits from Heaven. And she was a former magazine and communications consultant. And then something happened that changed her life entirely. And we're going to let her tell us what that was. She's dedicated and passionate about her research into metaphysics and the afterlife. She's a sought-after blogger and motivational speaker. She said, life is eternal, and so are we. She lives in New Jersey. We're so glad to have her on the line. Josie, welcome to the program today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
Great.
So, Jim, I'm listening to you in the introduction, and you said, I hate to break it to you, but, we're all going to die.
Yes.
Yes, we're going to die in the physical sense.
Right.
But we are not going to die in the spiritual sense.
I stand corrected. And that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. Now, okay. So when we talk about this, I want to get to that experience. It was here in your bio, but I didn't want to read it. I thought that you would tell it much better. Tell us what happened that changed your life.
Well, my husband had a friend who died in the World Trade Center attack. He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, and as you know, all the employees perished on that day. So I had never met my husband's friend and former boss, Rich, but on this particular night, I had what I would describe as a very lucid, vivid dream. It was almost like I was in a dream, partaking in what was happening. So I saw myself going down a long hallway, Jim, and I come to this door on the end, and I walk into this room, and I see desks and windows everywhere, and all of a sudden, I see my husband's friend, and he says to me, Josie, thank you for mentioning me in your book. And when I say he said it, Jim, it was telepathic. There were no words. It was just mind-to-mind communication. And what he was referring to, in my first book, Footprints in the Sand, I included an email that he wrote about the death of his father because it was so inspiring. So that's what he meant when he said, thank you for mentioning me in your book. Now, in response, in this dream, I said to him, Rich, you have to prove to me that this is really you. Jim, why did I say that? I don't know. I don't know. But I said, you have to prove to me that this is really you. And with that, he had this smirk on his face, and he walked over to a desk. He picked up a cell phone. It was one of those flip phones at the time. He opened it up, and he showed me a picture. There was a picture on the phone of him, his wife, and his son, and he said very clearly, Boston is okay. Now, I remember, in the dream, I had no idea what Boston is okay meant, okay? However, I knew intuitively that this was a message that he wanted me to get to his wife. He didn't say tell my wife. He just said Boston is okay, but I knew it was a message I had to get to his wife. So the next thing I know, I kind of go through what seemed like a window, and I'm on the street, and I look out, and I see him in what looks like the bed of a pickup truck, standing behind his wife and son, okay? And he kind of looks at me and says, okay, give her the message, and sort of pushes me forward. And when he did that, I woke up in a sitting position, sweating, panting, and out of breath, okay, feeling like something hit me in my chest. Was I scared? Absolutely. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before. So what did I do? My husband was already at work. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning at the time. I jumped up out of bed. I went to go call him, and I said, honey, you have to tell Richard's wife that Boston is okay. Well, how do you think he responded? He responded like I was off my rocker.
Mm-hmm.
He said, no way, are you crazy? She just lost her husband, and you want me to tell her Boston is okay? I'm not doing it. So we compromised. I said to him, they knew, Richard's sister-in-law, put it this way, Richard's sister-in-law worked in the same field as my husband, and he had her email address. So we compromised, and I said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll send you an email describing what happened. You send it to Richard's sister-in-law, and you tell her, if you think it's appropriate, forward it to your sister. Okay? So that's what we did. Now, the minute he sends the email, he immediately regrets it because he's thinking, oh, my God, what did I do? She's going to think I'm nuts. But I didn't, have any regrets whatsoever because I knew I did what I was supposed to do. So to make a long story short, Jim, about 2 weeks later, we're on vacation, and my husband gets a message on his BlackBerry, and basically it was from Richard's sister-in-law, and she was saying, how did she know? Richard's wife has a brother in Boston. Now, again, remember, I never met him. I never met his wife. I never met anyone in the family, okay? So Richard's wife had a brother in Boston. She was considering selling her home at the time and moving to Boston, but she felt guilty because she purchased the house right before her husband died. So now the message to me, tell her Boston, is okay, made perfect sense. And it shook me to the core because what does that mean? It means that somebody who is deceased came to me in a dream with a message for his wife, and this message was just validated. So can you imagine my shock?
Right. Absolutely.
Can you imagine my shock? So that's how it started. But I have to be honest, when I first started researching, what I call evidential afterlife communication, visits from heaven, I didn't do so with the intention of writing a book at first. When I did it, it was really to, discover it on my own, to find out if I was alone, to see if there were other people out there who experienced the same thing. And, oh, my God, I found out that I definitely was not alone, that, people all over the world experience the same thing. So that's what led to all of my books, pretty much.
And it's interesting to me because you had such a great validation. Maybe in some ways it seems like you were almost meant to pursue this.
I know I was meant to pursue this. In fact, I've been told that by Rich himself. One time I was doing a radio show in New York City, and prior to leaving to go to the studio, I happened to make a comment to my husband, Jim. I said, John, I wonder why I haven't heard, quote unquote, from Rich, because I reasoned, the book came out, it was because of him that this book was written, and I hadn't had any, vivid dreams or anything like that since, okay? So I said, I wonder why I haven't heard from him. So I go to the studio, and we're standing in this common area, waiting for the producer to call us in. And I'm standing there, and there's a 17-year-old psychic medium. And he looks at me, and he says, Josie? I said, yeah. He said, I have a gentleman here for you. So what do? I turn around. I turn around, I look, he goes, no. In spirit, So he starts describing him, and I said, oh, my God, you're talking about Rich. And he looks over my shoulder, and he goes, yes, it's Rich. He said, Rich wants me to tell you that you were meant to do what you do and that you were led to ARE. ARE Press, okay, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, was my first publisher. So he says you were led to ARE. Oh, and by the way, he says to tell you that the book you are working on right now is not going to come out when you think it's going to come out. It's going to come out 2 months later. So I'm like standing there, and I don't know what to think, right? And then all of a sudden the producer calls us in, and that was the end of my conversation with the psychic medium. Well, guess what happened? Shortly after that interview, I found out from my publisher that the book was not coming out when it was supposed to come out. It was coming out 2 months later.
Huh.
Just telling you that story now, I got goosebumps because I could not believe it. So once again, he gave me a validated message. So I've been, and several psychic mediums have told me that I was led to do what I do. And honestly, I really don't need them to tell me that. I know that. Intuitively, I know that. I know I'm doing my life's purpose. I'm trying to help people understand that life never ends and love never dies. That's my message. And sometimes, it's hard. It's overwhelming, dealing with the bereaved and things like that. But it's also very rewarding. I got an incredible a message from a woman who read my book, A Call from Heaven, and her message just touched my heart because she told me, she said, Josie, I just finished reading A Call from Heaven. She said, and your stories validated that the messages that I have received from my husband since he died over the past 2 years are real. And she said, I found myself at the end of each story saying, oh, my God, it is real. And she said, because of you, I can sleep tonight. And I tell you, I had tears in my eyes when I read that because that's why I do what I do, to help others. That's what it's all about.
So the kind of evidential things that you cover in this book, deathbed visits, angelic visions, crossing over to the other side. I want to talk about some of these because I find each one of these different kinds of cases fascinating. And one of the most fascinating is when I hear these stories, and I have a show called Campfire where people call in with their true stories of the supernatural. And we've had people people tell stories like this. This idea of deathbed visitations, it's fascinating to me. Tell us about that, and maybe you can give us an example, because I think that is really, really a fascinating area.
It is. What these phenomena are, they're powerful metaphysical experiences that the dying may experience right before death. But what I want to mention, though, it doesn't necessarily have to be right before death. People can experience these phenomena weeks before, days before, hours before death. What do I mean by that? In my own case, I'll tell you one story. I went to a party one time, and I'm standing there, and this woman walks in. I talk about this story in the book. It's one of my favorites. So I go to this party, and this woman walks in. And I didn't know that she was a psychic medium, but she introduced herself as Lori. And she says, Josie? I said, yes. She said, who's Carmen? And I said, oh, that's my father. She says, is he deceased? And I said, no, he's not. She said, okay, that's not who I mean. She goes, who's Carmen that's deceased? I said, my uncle. So she looks over my shoulder and she looks back at me and she says, your uncle wants you to tell his son that he is with Lynn. She is not alone.
Huh.
I think I almost passed out at that
point.
Because Lynn is my cousin Angela's wife, and she was in the hospital at that time dealing with lung cancer. Okay? So about a week later, I have another vivid dream. And in this particular dream, I'm in what looks like a hospital corridor, and I'm going down the hallway. I walk into this room, and I see my Uncle Tony, okay, another uncle who is deceased. I see him laying on a bed, Jim, okay? So I walk into the room. I see my uncle, who I was very close to. He was like a second father to me. And I said, Uncle Tony, what are you doing here? You're dead and buried. Why would I talk like that to him? I don't know, but that's what I said in the dream. I said, Uncle Tony, you're dead and buried. He sits up, Jim. He looks at me and he gives me this look like, you of all people, no, I'm not dead. Right? Okay? And he says, you know how much I miss you? And then all of a sudden, I knew he wanted me to be aware that we were not alone in this hospital room. But I didn't know who else was with us, but I knew there was somebody else in the hospital room with us, okay? With that, I wake up. I have a group on Facebook called Visits from Heaven, where people go on and share spiritual experiences, okay? So I go on to my Facebook group, and I tell my members, yeah, I just had this very vivid dream, and this is what happened, and I knew that my uncle was trying to tell me that somebody else was with us, but I don't know who it was. Well, 1 hour later, I got my answer. 1 hour later, my phone rang, and it was my Uncle Tony, the man in the dream, his daughter. And she called to tell me that my cousin Angela, his wife, Lynn, the woman I was told about the week before, passed away. So then I understood what my uncle was telling me. He was telling me that Lynn was not alone, that they were there to help her cross over to the other side. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It certainly is, but it absolutely is amazing. And we're going to talk about more amazing cases. Our guest is Josie Varga. She is the author of the new book, A Call from Heaven, Personal Accounts of Deathbed Visits, Angelic Visions, and Crossings to the Other Side. And we'll be back right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And keep listening, because I'm going to tell you how you can get your first month for only 99 cents. Now, you're listening to this program. Obviously, you love the supernatural, the strange, the paranormal, the Fortean. Now, for a long time, there wasn't a network. There wasn't a place you could go to see great television, great video in this regard. I mean, of course, you have stations that have a show here and a couple shows here and a couple shows there. But one place dedicated to just the kind of topics that we love. But that is all different now, because there is Gaia. It is a streaming TV service with those same topics and everything that we're interested in, and that's all they have. And boy, is there a lot of it, though. You're gonna absolutely love it, because Gaia explores those topics we love, and they're always providing viewers with tremendous new content. Now, every week they send over the latest and greatest that they have on. And for example, if you were a member of Gaia, you could watch this week on George Norrie's show, Beyond Belief, Nostradamus' Prophecies for Our Time by John Hogue. And we've had him on the program, and he's a fascinating guy. Or Sean Stone on Buzzsaw is talking to Len Kasten about the Illuminati and the alien world order. Wisdom Teachings, hosted by David Wilcock, The Searle Effect and Ascension, where he's going to explore the scientific proof of ascension as seen in the laboratory with Searle Effect generators. And then, get this one, Cosmic Disclosure, also hosted by David Wilcock and Corey Good. I'm going to talk about revealing the original secret space vehicles with Mark McCandlish. Wow. That sounds like a cool one. I'm telling you, there's something for everybody interested in these topics at Gaia. That's why you need to check it out. Now, one thing they've really done that's very cool is they've set up a page just for us to check everything out. All you have to do is go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim. If you go there, up in the upper right-hand side, there's kind of an orangish red. I think I may have said red before, but it looks like it's actually orange button up at the top right-hand side. You click on there, and it'll give you some different sign-up options. And one of them is only 99 cents for the first month. Can you beat that? 99 cents for the first month. You love the topics on the Paranormal Podcast. I know you are going to love the topics on Gaia. And I really think you should check it out. I have enjoyed it. I am a paying member. I will continue to be a paying member, enjoying the programming. check it out, Gaia.com/Jim, to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. Our guest today is Josie Varga. She is the author of A Call from Heaven, Personal Accounts of Deathbed Visits, Angelic Visions, and Crossings to the Other Side. Now, Josie, while we were offline listening to the commercial there, you were telling me about a specific kind of experience that you found eye-opening for you in your research, and you wanted to share it with people.
Yeah, it's a particular experience is called Peak Indian Experiences, okay? These were taken, the title was taken from a poem by John Keats and a book written by Francis Kolb in 1882. And what that means is when people, mention deceased loved ones at their deathbed of whose death they had no knowledge of. And what I mean by that is I had interviewed Bruce Grayson over at the University of Virginia, and he wrote a paper called Seeing Dead People Not Known to Have Died. And he shared a couple of experiences with me, and one of the most amazing is an experience with a little boy named Eddie Cuomo. Now, Eddie Cuomo, Jim, had a very high fever and went into a coma, okay? So he comes out of the coma, and his mom and dad are there, and, doctors and nurses, and he starts telling his parents about all these people that he saw in heaven. He mentioned his grandparents, his uncle, but all of a sudden he shocks his parents when he says he also saw his sister, Teresa, okay? Well, his father becomes very upset and says, "What are you talking about? Teresa's away at college. I just spoke to her 2 days ago." And his son says, "No, Dad, I saw her. She told me it wasn't my time, and I had to go back." So, again, the parents are very upset.
Right.
They go home. They find a message from the college. Their daughter was killed in a car accident just after midnight.
Oh, my. Oh, my. Wow.
Right?
Yeah, that,
I know.
And then what there, and we get stories, not exactly like that, but there are stories that we get on the Campfire Show, and I say there's basically two possibilities. A, it's supernatural, or somebody's lying. I mean, it's
right.
Either or. I mean, either it's supernatural or somebody's lying. And
Jim, but in cases like this, see, that's my point, and that's why these experiences were a huge eye-opener for me. How do you explain this?
Yes.
No one in the room knew that the sister died. No one.
Right. Absolutely.
So, and yet he comes out of the coma, and the first thing he says that he saw his sister, who everybody else had no reason to believe died.
Yeah. Wow. And that is utterly amazing to me. And there's no other good explanation. I mean, the skeptics, what can they say? I mean, they'll come up with something, but to me, that kind of validation, that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was really, the highlight for me. And there was also one other thing that I found amazing. There's a term called terminal lucidity.
Lucidity.
What that means is, the unexpected return of mental clarity or responsiveness shortly before death. For instance, there's a doctor named Dr. Scott Haig, and he talked about a patient of his that had cancer throughout his whole body, okay? And he says that his brain was basically not there. He had no brain stems, just basically non-existent. So he's on his deathbed, and all of a sudden, he says, the patient woke up and was able to converse with his family members that were present. This is a man who could not talk, who could not eat, who could not move, who could not do anything, who's basically not there, okay? And he wakes up, Jim, and he's able to say goodbye to his family, talk to his family for about 5 minutes, and then he just lays down and passes away.
Wow.
So that is amazing. And these things happen all the time. In fact, I had the honor of interviewing a professor at the University of Vienna. His name is Dr. Alexander Bethany, okay? And he is researching those with Alzheimer's disease. And he says it's amazing how many times this happens. And what he said to me was when he first started his research, he was worried. He's worried if he was going to be able to find enough cases. But now he says he has so many cases, he doesn't know how he's going to put it all together, And, the interesting thing is the brain doesn't suddenly fill up with new neurons. The brain remains exactly the way it was before. But yet suddenly they have mental clarity. Suddenly they're able to say goodbye to loved ones.
Which materialistically would make no sense.
Right. Because, like I said, it's not like the brain suddenly fills up with new neurons. So to me, that's very evidential too. Because scientists, doctors, they don't have any explanation for that.
No, I agree.
They don't have any explanation.
That's another thing that fascinates me, are experiences witnessed by healthcare workers. Did you run across a lot of those types of stories?
Oh, sure. There were, I interviewed a lot of doctors, nurses. In fact, I joined a forum. It's kind of like Facebook, okay? It's called allnurses.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined the forum because I wanted to see, how often this was happening among nurses and hospice workers and things like that. And it's absolutely amazing how many times this happens. I went on there and I couldn't believe all the stories. There was one that I absolutely loved. This particular chapter didn't make a call from heaven because they felt that I had enough stories from doctors and nurses, but I'll tell you the story quickly because it's one of my favorites. There was a story about a guy who was always hitting the call button, and driving the nurses crazy.
Right.
Okay? So on this particular day, he passed away about 8 o'clock. So he passes away, and they call the family. They come and take his body. Now it's about 10 o'clock in the evening, and the room is empty. The nurses are sitting at the nurses' station. All of a sudden, his call button starts going off. Okay? So they go into his room. There's nobody there, but his call button is going off. Well, it went on for a very long time, Jim. And there was a particular nurse there that was very spiritual, and they said she literally went into this room, this now empty room, and said, "Please stop it. Go into the light." Okay?
Wow.
And they said, I kid you not, the minute she said that, the call button stopped going off.
Oh my goodness.
I know, right?
Wow.
So these, what they tell me is that these, healthcare workers see this happen all the time. It's almost like, it doesn't really faze them because they see it so much. And, years ago, people were afraid to talk about these experiences. But now I've been studying the afterlife for over 10 years now, and I think that fear is starting to chip away because people, because people are understanding because of, books like yours and books like mine, people are understanding that, this is not crazy. This is normal, and it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to share, your experience. It brings a lot of comfort. I tell you, with these deathbed phenomena, the number one thing that it does is take away the fear of death, and that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely it is. Now, a couple of other things I want to talk to you about, and then maybe get a favorite story, although you've told us a couple already. Angelic visions. People see angels?
People see angels all the time. There's a doctor named John Lerma. He wrote a book for New Page, and I included his story in the book. It's a story from Learning from the Light, and he talks about a little girl named Sarah. Well, she wasn't little at the time of her death, but she talked about seeing angels in her room, seeing, Mary and Jesus, So yes, people do see angels, people do see angelic visions, but the number one thing that they see are deceased loved ones.
That's amazing. Another thing, and I don't know if you cover it in the book, but I think of people's last words. You know, when they look like they're looking out. For example, I think of Steve Jobs, who apparently his last words, he was kind of like looking to the ceiling or towards the top or corner of a room or something, and said, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow," and then people will say different things. Did you run into that a lot?
Yes, and one of my favorites is Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster, his last words were, "I still live."
Wow.
I still live. So, you know, it's pretty amazing if you really think about all the things that people say. And like the Steve Jobs, for instance, I mean, he was so brilliant, you know. So what exactly did he see? Why would he say, "Oh wow, oh wow"? I mean,
yeah, because this was a guy who was building, I think at the time of his death, the largest private yacht ever built. I mean, he had access to every luxury in life if he wanted, although I think he lived fairly simply, but he's probably seen it all and done it all and had access to it all, and then something that was so incredible that even it blew him away.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean. It means something coming from somebody like Steve Jobs. You know, and one of the things that people say to me, people still say, you know, the skeptics will say, well, how do you know it's not just a hallucination? You know, how do you know it's really a deathbed visit, not a hallucination? Well, the point is there is a huge difference between a hallucination and a deathbed visit, and mainly hallucinations are fearful and confusion, but deathbed visits are very comforting and peaceful. Hallucinations are psychotic, okay? And deathbed visits are very coherent and consistent. So, and also what I said before when the story of Eddie Como.
Right.
Hallucinations cannot be shared, Jim.
True.
Okay, yet deathbed visits can be shared. Other people in the room have reported seeing this phenomena. There's one story in the book that I love. I talk about different. Let me say this first before I go into that. There are different types of deathbed visits. One is visual. 2 is gateway, which means a portal opens up in the room. 3 is atmosphere. You know, changes in the room temperature, lights appearing, wind, and things like that. 4th is synchronicity, and what I mean by that is phones ringing at the time of death, clocks stopping at the time of death, okay, things like that. 5 is dreams. People have had dreams of their loved one coming to them to say goodbye, and then at the exact moment being woken up by a phone call from the hospital telling them that their loved one died. 6 is auditory, and this is why, you know, you read a lot of books, and people often refer to these as deathbed visions. And I didn't want to call them deathbed visions. I called them deathbed visits because they're not always, you know, visual. Sometimes people hear angelic music on their deathbed. And 7th is shared, okay? So having said that, in this particular story, this woman is in the hospital room with her father, and all of a sudden he tells everybody in the room, he's looking up at the ceiling, right? Everybody else can see a white ceiling. But he's looking up and he says he could see beautiful blue sky. And they're like, what? He's like, no, you can see that. He says he could see beautiful blue sky. Shortly after that, he wanted to go, you know, very common. People reach forward on their deathbed. People want to go with, you know, someone that's unseen, someone nobody else in the room can see. So her father on this particular day was reaching forward. He wanted to go with someone there. And she says, shortly after that, they're all sitting in the room, and she saw a brilliant white light, okay? Brilliant white light. Now, before this, her sister died a few months prior, and she says, as the room filled up with this beautiful white light, she said this peace and warmth came over her, And all of a sudden, she heard her sister's voice, her deceased sister's voice, say, "Don't worry, heaven is beautiful." And shortly after that, she passed away.
Wow. Wow. What a story. My goodness, what a story. And
I mean, it's like when I first started researching the afterlife, and I had my experience, Jim, I thought, okay, nothing could ever top that, But the more the research, the more I get into it, the more I realize there is to know. There's so much to understand.
Right.
It's really, I don't know. I think the more I research, the more I want to research. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, I totally understand. And I think that people should pick up this book, A Call from Heaven, Personal Accounts of Deathbed Visits, Angelic Visions, and Crossings to the Other Side. This is one of those topics I could talk about all day long, but you should pick up the book. Josie, where can people find the book and connect to everything you do?
Well, they can go to my website, Jim, which is www.josievarga.com. The book is available online or wherever books are sold, Barnes & Noble and different bookstores. And like I said, they can also find me on Facebook. I have a wonderful group called Visits from Heaven. I also have a page for the book called A Call from Heaven. So, people can find me and email me. I love to hear from my readers.
Very good, Josie. I appreciate the book. Again, is A Call from Heaven, Personal Accounts of Deathbed Visits, Angelic Visions, and Crossings to the Other Side. Our guest has been the author, Josie Varga. Josie, thank you again for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for tuning in to the Paranormal Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it. Maybe the first part you were a little bit frightened, and then the second part you found a little bit reassuring. And we try to bring it all to you, all realms of the paranormal. And as I said before, if you're listening on an Apple device, please go into your podcasts app. That's got that little purple tile with the little white stick figure on it. Click on that. Go down to that magnifying glass at the bottom of the page. Type in Paranormal Podcast. The show will come up. Click on it and hit the subscribe button. We would really, really appreciate it. We thank you so much for tuning in to the Paranormal Podcast, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and JimHarold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to JimHarold.com, and thanks for listening.